before understanding appears, something else must happen first. The mind must stop defending itself. Most people think listening begins when words enter the ears. But real listening begins much earlier. It begins when the need to argue dissolves. Arjuna is standing in the middle of the battlefield, but the battle has already moved inside him. He is not confused in a simple way. He is overwhelmed. And when the mind is overwhelmed, it does not seek wisdom. It seeks relief. This is an important distinction. When we are calm, we ask questions to understand. When we are overwhelmed, we ask questions to escape. Arjuna's early words are not questions, they are explanations, carefully arranged, emotionally charged, morally sound. But explanations are not openness, they are shields. The mind under pressure becomes a lawyer. It does not ask, "What is true?" It argues, "Here is why I cannot do this." It collects reasons. It presents evidence. It builds a case, not to discover truth, but to justify retreat. Arjuna speaks of compassion, of family, of the cost of violence. These are not false concerns, but they are incomplete, because they arise from a mind that is already leaning away. This is why Krishna does not interrupt him. This is subtle and important. Krishna does not rush to correct Arjuna. He does not immediately offer philosophy. He does not counter each argument, because doing so would be useless. A mind that is still arguing cannot listen. We often miss this in our own lives. We say we want guidance, but we are still busy defending our position. We say we want clarity, but we secretly hope someone will agree with our hesitation. So even when wise words arrive, they bounce off. Not because they are wrong, but because the mind is not ready. Arjuna is still holding his identity tightly. Warrior, protector, moral man. As long as identity is being defended, listening is impossible. Because listening requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels dangerous when everything already feels unstable. This is why arguments often intensify just before surrender. The mind senses change approaching and resists harder. It speaks more, explains more, justifies more, not because it is confident, but because it is afraid. Krishna allows this phase to unfold. He lets Arjuna speak fully, not out of indifference, but out of understanding, because forcing wisdom on a defensive mind only strengthens the defense. There is a quiet truth here. Before learning can begin, the mind must become tired of arguing. Not defeated, not humiliated, just exhausted. Exhausted of its own noise. Arjuna has not reached that point yet, but he is close, and Krishna knows it. This part of the Gita is often overlooked because it does not contain teachings, but it contains something more fundamental. It shows us the state of mind that must exist before teachings can be received. If you notice your own life carefully, you will see this pattern again and again. Clarity does not arrive when you are most articulate. It arrives when you stop explaining yourself. In the next part, we will look at what actually breaks the argument cycle. Not force, not logic, but something quieter. That moment, when Arjuna no longer tries to convince and begins to soften. That is where listening begins. Arguments do not stop because they are disproved. They stop because they are exhausted. The mind can defend itself only for so long. Eventually, something deeper interrupts the noise. Arjuna has spoken at length. He has explained his fear through morality. He has wrapped hesitation in compassion. He has reasoned carefully, intelligently, passionately. And yet, nothing inside him settles. This is important, because if explanation truly solved suffering, Arjuna would already be at peace. But he is not. There comes a moment when the mind realizes something quietly unsettling. I have said everything I can say, and I still feel lost. This moment is not dramatic. There is no collapse, no sudden insight, just a subtle recognition. Words are no longer helping. This is often where people turn outward again. They look for more opinions, more reassurance, more voices. But Arjuna does something different. He pauses, and in that pause, the body speaks. The Gita describes this clearly. Arjuna's strength leaves him, his bow slips, his body trembles. These are not poetic exaggerations. They are signs that the mind has reached its limit. The intellect is tired, and when the intellect is tired, something deeper can finally be felt. We often misunderstand this stage. We call it weakness, failure, loss of confidence. But it is none of those things. It is honesty arriving through exhaustion. As long as the mind is busy explaining, it does not have to feel. But when explanations fail, feeling returns, not as emotion alone, but as truth. Arjuna begins to sense that his arguments are no longer convincing even himself. This is a dangerous moment for the ego, because the ego survives on certainty, and certainty is slipping. Notice what Krishna still does not do. He does not interrupt. He does not comfort prematurely. He does not rush to reassure. He allows Arjuna to remain in this exposed space, because clarity cannot be given before confusion is fully acknowledged. This is where many of us turn away in life. The moment our explanations stop working, we distract ourselves. We fill the space with noise, with activity, with urgency. Anything to avoid sitting in the uncomfortable gap between knowing and not knowing. But Arjuna cannot escape. The battlefield does not allow distraction. And so he stays, not calm, not resolved, but present. This presence is the first real shift, not toward answers, but toward openness. The mind is no longer arguing. It is not listening, yet either. It is simply no longer defending. This is a fragile state. The temptation here is to rebuild certainty quickly, to grab the first explanation that feels stable. But Krishna does not offer that, because borrowed certainty is just another form of escape. Instead, something quieter is allowed to emerge. A recognition Arjuna has not yet spoken. I do not know, not philosophically, but deeply. This realization does not come from thinking. It comes from running out of thought, and this is why it matters. Because real listening does not begin when answers appear. It begins when resistance ends. In the next part, we will arrive at the moment when Arjuna finally stops speaking about his confusion and begins to speak from it. That moment changes everything. That is the moment when the student appears. There is a difference between speaking about confusion and speaking from it. Until now, Arjuna has been doing the first. He has explained his conflict, analyzed it, defended it. Now something shifts, not in the battlefield, not in Krishna, inside Arjuna. He realizes that his words are no longer protecting him. They are only circling the same pain. And in that realization, a different kind of sentence begins to form. Not an argument, not a justification, but an admission. This moment is subtle. It does not announce itself loudly. There is no declaration of surrender yet, just a quiet internal recognition. My understanding is not enough. This is one of the hardest realizations for the human mind. Because until now, Arjuna has relied on strength, skill, intelligence, and moral reasoning. These qualities have served him well in life. Letting go of them feels like stepping into emptiness. But something important happens here. For the first time, Arjuna stops trying to convince Krishna. He stops trying to appear right. He stops trying to frame his fear in acceptable language. And then he speaks differently. Not as a warrior, not as a moral thinker, but as a human being who no longer knows what to do. This is where the Gita truly begins, not with philosophy, but with humility. Arjuna says, in essence, I am confused. I cannot see clearly. I need guidance. This sentence is simple, but it carries more weight than all the arguments that came before it. Why? Because it is the first sentence that does not defend an identity. It does not protect an image. It does not try to control the outcome. It simply opens the door. This is the moment Arjuna becomes a student, not because Krishna demands it, but because Arjuna finally allows it. There is an important distinction here. Asking for advice is not the same as becoming a student. Advice can be accepted or rejected. Studenthood requires trust, and trust requires letting go of control. Until this moment, Arjuna wanted guidance that would support his position. Now, he is ready for guidance that may change him. That difference is everything. Notice what happens to the energy of the conversation. The urgency softens, the defensiveness dissolves. The need to argue disappears, not because Arjuna feels better, but because he feels honest. This honesty is not weakness. It is strength without armor. It is clarity without certainty. Krishna has been waiting for this moment, not impatiently, not strategically, but attentively, because wisdom can only be offered to someone who is no longer protecting themselves from it. This is why teachings do not begin earlier, not because the listener is unworthy, but because the listener is not yet open. In our own lives, this moment often arrives quietly. When we stop asking, who is right, and begin asking, what am I missing? It does not feel empowering at first. It feels exposed. But this exposure is the doorway. In the next part, we will see how Krishna responds to this openness. Not with immediate solutions, not with comforting reassurances, but with something more precise. Something that meets Arjuna exactly where he now stands. Now that Arjuna has stopped arguing, something important becomes possible. But what happens next is not what most people expect. Krishna does not immediately comfort Arjuna. He does not say, everything will be fine. He does not soften the situation or try to remove the difficulty. This is deliberate. When someone finally admits, I do not know, the instinct of most people is to reassure, to reduce discomfort, to restore stability. But reassurance given too early creates dependence, not clarity. Krishna understands this. Arjuna is now open, but he is also exposed. This exposure is fragile. If Krishna rushes to soothe it, the mind will close again. It will cling to comfort instead of understanding. So Krishna does something very precise. He responds, but not emotionally. He responds, but not gently. He responds with clarity, not consolation. This moment is often misunderstood. People read it and think Krishna is being harsh. But he is not. He is being exact. Krishna addresses Arjuna not as a victim, but as someone capable of understanding. This is respect. True respect does not treat confusion as weakness. It treats it as the threshold of insight. Krishna points directly at the contradiction. Arjuna speaks of wisdom, yet grieves as though clarity has been lost. Arjuna speaks of knowledge, yet behaves as though knowledge is absent. This is not criticism. It is diagnosis. When the mind is open, it can tolerate precision. Earlier, this would have felt like an attack. Now it lands, because Arjuna is no longer defending himself. This is another important lesson. Listening does not mean being soothed. It means being willing to hear what challenges your assumptions. Krishna's first response does not solve the problem. It reframes it. He shifts Arjuna's attention away from emotion-driven conclusions and toward a deeper perspective. This reframing would have failed earlier, but now it works. Not because Krishna changed his words, but because Arjuna changed his stance. The teaching is subtle. Wisdom does not enter through force or persuasion. It enters through readiness. Many of us miss this moment in our own lives. We want insight, but only if it feels comforting. We want truth, but only if it does not disturb us. Krishna offers neither comfort nor disturbance. He offers clarity, and clarity is neutral. It does not take sides. It simply reveals what is. Arjuna does not immediately feel relief, but something else happens. The inner chaos slows. The emotional storm loses momentum, because now there is something solid to listen to. This is why Krishna speaks only after surrender. Not because surrender is demanded, but because surrender creates space. In the next part, we will look at what listening actually feels like once the mind has stopped defending itself, how understanding begins to move, not as information, but as alignment. Listening does not arrive suddenly. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like certainty. It feels like less resistance. After Krishna begins to speak, something subtle changes in Arjuna. Not his situation, not the battlefield, his inner posture. Earlier, every word Arjuna heard passed through a filter of fear, a filter of identity, a filter of urgency. Now that filter is thinner, not gone, just thinner. This is how understanding begins, not as agreement, but as receptivity. Arjuna is no longer preparing a response while Krishna speaks. He is no longer searching for flaws. He is no longer waiting for permission to retreat. He is simply listening. This kind of listening feels unfamiliar. It feels slower, quieter, almost empty. And that emptiness can feel unsettling at first. The mind is used to holding positions. When positions dissolve, the mind fears collapse. But what actually happens is different. The mind becomes spacious. In this space, ideas no longer feel like threats. They can be examined, held, set down. Krishna's words begin to land not as commands, but as perspectives, not as answers, but as orientation. This is important. The Gita is not giving Arjuna instructions yet. It is giving him ground, a place to stand internally. Understanding here does not feel like excitement. It feels like steadiness. A quiet sense that something is aligning. Arjuna's suffering does not disappear, but it is no longer multiplying. Earlier, his thoughts fed his fear. Now, fear has less fuel. This is the first sign that listening is real, not relief, not confidence, but stability. Many people misunderstand this stage. They think if listening is working, they should feel inspired. But inspiration comes later. First comes orientation. Krishna is helping Arjuna see without immediately asking him to act. This matters, because action taken before understanding only recreates conflict. The mind that listens does not rush. It allows ideas to settle. It allows silence between thoughts. It does not demand closure. Arjuna is learning something more important than doctrine. He is learning how to be in the presence of truth without running from it and without clinging to it. This is why the Gita unfolds slowly. Not because the ideas are complex, but because the listener must become capable. Listening is not passive. It requires courage. The courage to remain open without knowing where openness will lead. Arjuna is now in that state, not resolved, not decided, but aligned enough for wisdom to continue. In the final part, we will look at why this moment matters far beyond the battlefield. Why this shift from arguing to listening is the most important movement a human mind can make. The moment Arjuna stops arguing and begins listening is not just a turning point in a story. It is a turning point in the human mind. Most of our suffering does not come from difficult situations. It comes from the inner noise that surrounds those situations. The constant explaining, the defending, the justifying, the need to be right before we are ready. Arjuna's battlefield is extreme, but the inner movement is universal. We all reach moments where our thinking no longer helps, where our explanations repeat themselves, where every option feels heavy. In those moments, the instinct is to think harder, to analyze more, to argue better. But the Gita shows something different. Transformation does not begin with better arguments. It begins when arguments fall silent. The shift from arguing to listening is not about obedience. It is about alignment. Alignment between what is happening and how we are meeting it. When Arjuna listens, the world does not suddenly become simple, but it becomes navigable, not because the path is clear, but because he is no longer fighting himself. This is the quiet power of listening. It does not remove uncertainty. It changes our relationship with it. Most people wait for certainty before they stop resisting, but certainty never comes first. Listening does. The Gita does not ask Arjuna to abandon his humanity. It asks him to stop hiding behind it, to stop using virtue as armor, to stop using thought as escape. And in doing so, Arjuna becomes more human, not less. Calmer, not passive. Present, not resigned. This is why Krishna's teachings endure. Not because they offer answers, but because they show a way of meeting life when answers are not available. The battlefield remains. The consequences remain. But Arjuna is no longer fragmented. He is listening. And listening is the beginning of wholeness. In our own lives, this moment often arrives quietly, not as insight, but as a simple exhaustion with noise. A willingness to stop convincing, a readiness to hear what we could not hear before. When that readiness appears, guidance finds us, not necessarily from another person, sometimes from silence, sometimes from clarity within, sometimes from simply seeing things as they are. The Gita begins here, not with doctrine, not with instruction, but with a human being who finally stops arguing with reality. And that is why this moment matters. Because before any wisdom can change us, we must first become capable of listening.